Okay, in this, I believe, final section of this series on essay writing, I want to talk a little bit about some common problems with student essays. And the first one that I want to talk about is answering the wrong question. And this is the first one I'm talking about because it's the one that infects the most number of categories when I'm grading your essay. If you answer the wrong question, that undermines just about everything that you can do in the essay. It means you've probably got the wrong objections. It means you've probably got, it means your thesis grade goes down. It means, well, it means certainly your focus grade is going to be a 0 and so on and so forth. So it really sort of has ripple effects. So you want to very carefully consider the prompt and what it is that's being asked of you. And if you don't understand what's being asked of you, it's perfectly fair game to ask me to help you. Now, I don't want to write your paper for you, but I can certainly try to clarify what the question is. And so if it's not clear to you, again, get in touch, and I'm more than happy to try to help out. A second problem is appealing to unreliable authorities. This is true with citations of works that aren't particularly reliable. You found an internet source that happens to say what you want them to say, and so you quote them. That's not necessarily a reliable source, and it might be one of many sources, and it may just not be a particularly representative one. And so you don't want to appeal to unreliable sources when it comes to evidence, and certainly you don't want to appeal to it in an argument where so-and-so makes a claim of value, therefore that must be true because so-and-so may not be a reliable authority. So, you know, often students like to refer to the Constitution or the Bible or whoever their favorite author is, someone like Thomas Jefferson or Martin Luther King, and they'll say, well, they said that, so that must be true. And of course, they may have said many true things, but it's not necessarily the case that all of the things they said were true, and it's not necessarily the case that the student is interpreting what they have said correctly anyway, even if it was true. And so, as a result, I would generally stay away from appealing to authority. The authorities that you might appeal to are authorities on empirical matters. Right, so if studies have been done on a particular empirical question, I think that it's perfectly fine to say so-and-so studied this in the journal of whatever, and this is what they found. That seems like an okay way to appeal to authority. But I wouldn't necessarily just cherry-pick quotes from famous authors and try to use them to bolster your view. I just don't think that that's particularly persuasive, because of course your audience might not be sympathetic to that particular author. Okay, a third problem is quotation abuse. Now, quotations are important. Quotations for authors are going to be there to help you express certain points that are not your own in a fairly concise way, but they don't substitute for your own analysis, and quotes are never self-explanatory. They always have to be introduced somehow, show why it's relevant, and they always have to be explained after you've quoted. So you always have to say what work that quote is doing for you. Again, it's never going to be self-explanatory. They don't substitute for your own analysis. And they always need to be commented upon. You need to, if you're going to use a quote, then you need to comment, consider whether it's true or not, consider whether it's the point it's making is valid or not, and so on and so forth. I would say that often, particularly when students are quoting long passages, that it might even be more efficient to summarize on your own, to paraphrase, rather than to quote a long passage. So, you know, quotes are most effectively used when they're fairly brief. When they're long, I think it's often the case the student can do a better job of summarizing the information. Okay, the fourth problem is a lack of evidence. This is basically comes usually in papers where I see a lot of assertions. I see the student has a lot of opinions, but not a whole lot of reasons backing up or a lot of facts backing up the opinions. If you have a claim of fact, it needs to have evidence backing them up. That's got to be automatic. That's got to be something that you consider as a matter of course, that when you are making a claim, you need to back it up, particularly a claim of fact. If you think the world works in a certain way, you need to have some independent confirmation of that for your reader to believe you. That's true also about claims about what people think. If you say most people think X, then I'd like to see survey data on whether that's true or not. I need to see poll numbers. And it's also true about claims about legacy of historical figures. If you say that X was a great president, then I want to see evidence. Do historians like him? What did he do that was so great? I mean, my point is simply that all claims of fact, as much as possible, need to be substantiated by independent evidence. Questions of values, I think you should be more comfortable introducing on their own. If you introduce fairly common sense values, I think that you'll be okay. But again, if you're introducing a controversial principle, you may have to do some work defending it. But again, assume that your audience is skeptical and that they are not going to take what you say at face value, which means that you need to do some work to show them. Okay, finally, let's talk about some style issues. There's three types of style issues that I want to talk about. Sentence fragments, rhetorical questions, and bad analogies. Sentence fragments are sentences that are either missing a subject, an object, or a verb. It's hard for me, not being an English professor, it's hard for me to explain exactly why these are bad, but you want to talk in complete sentences as much as you can possibly do so. You're not writing an email, you're not writing a text message, you're writing an essay for a stranger. They're owed a certain amount of respect and therefore a certain amount of formality in the way you speak. So you need to use your formal voice, and that means not giving sentence fragments, and generally speaking, always using complete sentences. Avoid rhetorical questions as well. One of the base starting points that we were talking about earlier was that you have to assume that your audience might be very different from you, might have very different background assumptions than you, and so rhetorical questions almost always backfire because there's always an answer that defies the sense of your rhetorical question. So don't substitute your rhetorical question for an argument. In fact, I would suggest never asking questions in your paper. Just attempt to answer questions. I've very rarely seen a rhetorical question work. And finally, bad analogies. Analogies are great, examples are great, but they have to actually match what it is that the point that you're trying to make. An insufficient or incomplete analogy is open to rebuttals and objections, and potentially devastating ones. And so you need to make sure that the analogy you bring up is in fact analogous, and the example that you bring up is in fact an example of the principle illustrated. Because if that can be challenged, then you run into trouble. Okay, turns out that we have one more. We're going to do one more on conclusions next.